Hello everybody, this is Joseph Habdank from Orgnet coming back to you with yet another tutorial where I'm teaching you the professional approach to software development and consultancy using JQuery, ASP.NET, JSON and MsSql. In these tutorials I'm teaching you what is the professional approach to it. I'm not teaching you how to use Visual Studio, how to program in these languages. I assume you know this stuff already. I'm just showing you the proper programming practices, because when you're learning programming, you're not becoming a professional by just learning the language. You're actually becoming a professional because you have the correct and very maintainable and expandable programming practices. So I'm showing you how you can use your skills that you already have right now to make your code that you're making 1,000 times better. So in this particular tutorial, I'm still looking at the databases and how you can arrange your tables in order to make your project expandable, meaning how to make it easy for you to add new functionality without making major changes in the database. And it's a fundamental part of programming and of design. You have to make sure that your project is easily expandable every time, because you will always have customers coming back to you and saying, I want more updates, and then you want to make it easy for you. So without any further talk, let's jump into the Visual Studio immediately and let's go through what I was thinking. So let's look at the database that we had before. This is this one, and in this particular tutorial I'll be talking about how to handle languages, multiple languages, because pretty much at this moment in time multilingual applications is a given. You always have to design your applications in a way that allows you to handle multiple languages. Pretty much if you don't do it, you will regret making this decision at some point. So first thing that I want to do before actually going to languages is I want to add a small thing to this database, which I have forgotten to do last time, which is basically a table, which is not necessary, but it makes it easier. The table that defines the database object type, because later on we'll see that of course, because of the inheritance that we discussed in the previous modules here, the user inherits just from this, but actually you will end up having a user object that will have some articles inside, or maybe some, if you have some other tables here like a file or let's say YouTube video or whatever else, you will have, for example, a user that will have all of these objects under DB object, and then it will be hard to tell what actually did we want this to be, or to be in the first place, if it's an article or a user, because if it has all of the different objects then you can't really tell. So the first thing that we want to do is basically we want to have the DB object, and it's a very simple table that basically has again an ID and key. Following the naming convention, I have just the table name plus the type suffix. And again, the ID is the self-incrementing number, and key is just a string. Now finally at this, let's have a quick look at this. By the way, this is how it looks. User, article, that's it, following the same naming convention as described before. If you haven't watched previous tutorials, please go back and do. They're actually quite good, I think, and sometimes funny. So have a look, because in the previous one I believe I described the naming conventions. So, well, I'm gonna just expand this not to hide the fields there anymore. So now, and in this way, we know exactly what it is, because even though it will have the user will have some articles attached to it, let's say about me or whatever else, well, this table will define what kind of object was it. You could make it as well a mapper, many to many, but I just, for the sake of simplicity, I don't do it. For majority of cases, this is enough. Now, let's jump into the languages, language handling. Pretty much every single object, maybe not user, but let's say article or a PDF file or a video, they'll have a language. So it is very, very logical not to have the language here, but to have a language on the top level in the object that you inherit from. It just makes sense that way. So as you can see, I have a language ID here. Which is an integer, which basically is a mapper to a table, which I'm going to just add right now. which is this one. Let me just quickly change the view mode to, I think, standard. Yeah, that's the one. And the language has a very few fields actually. The language table is only ID, which is automatically incremented identifier, of course, native name, which is the name in the original language, which is, for example, I can show you here. For example, I have English, and EN is the code, then Dansk for Danish, and the DA is the code, then Deutsch, and DE is the code, and Polski, PL, is for Polish. Or Dansk is Danish, Deutsch is German, and Polski is Polish. So basically, it's just a table to refer which language it is. It's a very simple table, nothing fancy about it. But now we're gonna come into the interesting stuff, which I was already mentioning before, and now I'm gonna really describe it. And it's the language data. How do we actually handle the languages generally? Before I'm going into it, this language is nullable field. There's a reason for that. The reason is because, for example, if you have a file which is a picture, and this picture is just a drawing a diagram, no text, then it might be actually for all languages, and I substitute this by having this field nullable. So if this is null, it means it's a non-language object, meaning it doesn't belong to any specific language. For example, users usually would have the language null, unless you, for example, through the language of the user, you want to save what is his main language of that is he using. Then you can mimic that by having this not null with certain number. But actually, for users, I would usually have a table called place with all the address data and stuff like that, and then I would have the country there, so I wouldn't actually use this here, but you can still do it. Now, coming back to how do we handle languages. Now we're coming to a very important point. For example, imagine that you're trying to insert an object. You're trying to insert something to database, and then you have to, let's say, define the visibility or whatever else. As I mentioned before, this column is not a name, this is a key, and this key, when you're showing this, for example, visibility type in a drop list, you want this drop list to be already language oriented. Let's say you have insert form, and you have insert form for, let's say, article, and then the form, of course, is HTML, so it is stored in database, obviously, because it has to belong to a certain language, and then the labels in the text will be just language oriented, but the drop list has to be automatically generated from this database. So you don't want this name to be a hard-coded English text, because you want this key to actually relate to a specific language entry. Therefore, this key is a language key. This is not a name. So let's say visibility type will be guest or administrator. Inside this table, as I have shown you before, and let me just open it again, show table data. These ones here are not text. They are actual keys to the language file, or actually language table. And by language table, I mean a table of all the text that is being translated to different languages when you change the language. So this and this would be a key to a table. Now let's see which table. Well, there's no table here yet, but there will be one in a second, and that is language data. Language data contains all the data, as it says, as the name hints, related to a certain language. So you will have, for example, a key. Let's say this one, dbObject.user. That will be the key, and then a value in a given language, because you can see it has a relation to ID. So let's say for this entry, db type user, there will be multiple entries. There will be a user in Danish, user in English, user in Polish, user in German, any other language that you want. And that will be for every single text that is in the database, in the system. Now it will be used both for this stuff that is here and for regular text on the website or wherever else. Let's have a look how it looks inside. So as I mentioned before, you have the key, which in this case is the from the other table, and then the English value of it. Request count is just how many times it was requested. Is just for basically it's for statistics, because sometimes you will insert a key which is never used because you just in the end you'll delete it before publishing new version. Then the request count is 0. Then you can actually really easily scroll through it and delete all the entries that are 0, not to have some hanging text that is not necessary. So I like to keep this request count because it will be 0 for the fields that are unused. Because every time I request this information, I would increment this particular value, the request count, and then if you have some information hanging, you just delete it. But anyway, coming back, so you have this user, article, user in English, and article in English, and then you can see 2 is a Danish, so you have Poa and article, which is basically a translation of the names. Now, as I mentioned before, here you will have all sorts of stuff that is being used. So let's say you have a component on the website, which is login label. As a naming convention, I'll always start with the component name or a table name as before. Oh, sorry. And then I would say not logged in text, for example. The value, you are not logged in. Request count obviously 0 and language English. In this way, you are basically doing the same as you would do with your language file if you would use the XML ASP.NET language, but I mean this is obviously million gazillion times better. You will use this basically as your key to get the text, and that's obviously your text. Later on I'll be expanding on this because I'll be adding formatting, and like I'm writing my own classes where you do formatting and stuff like that. So I'll be expanding on this. Now this is the beta primitive version of how you do it. Additionally, try always to make your keys as descriptive as possible. So as you see, this exactly tells you what it is, so you know how to write, what to write, because sometimes you can write stuff that is basically completely confusing. Try to don't be afraid to have long text here, like even 50, 100 characters. Don't worry, make it as descriptive as is necessary, so when somebody looks at this key, he knows exactly what you mean. When you're programming later, obviously you would make a component perhaps which automatically handles languages, so you don't have to think of which ID it is, etc, etc. But this is something that we'll be talking about later. Now I'm talking only about databases, and database wise, this structure that you have here is already pretty much over. Just to have an overview, again, what we do, we have a language that is being connected to an object. This means that particular object is in one language, and then so this was already it for the object part. But then obviously we want to have the possibility to handle language. Have some text that is being shown in different languages on this particular website, and that is done by having a table, basically a dictionary table with a key and value pairs connected to a certain language. And then you would have a whole set of data here in English and in Danish and in German and in Polish or any other language you want, Chinese, whatever. And then you translate it. Now the only difference why this is better than the standard language file that you have, of course, the database, so this is already 1,000 times better, but I really like this request count thing that I already described. You by default insert it 0, and when you are requesting it every single time, you write a custom SQL that increments this value, and then you can, every time you make an update of database, for example, you can delete everything that is 0, so you can remove all the unnecessary entries. So now this is it. Thanks for watching, guys, and again, as always, you're getting smarter and smarter every time you watch this video, so think of it how much you're gaining. You've learned how professionals handle languages and databases, and wait and stay tuned for next videos that will be coming. I plan it once a week, and take care, guys. You're awesome. Until next time, cheers.